my job under the Code of Conduct.
Yeah. Code of Conduct doesn't override the New Zealand Bill of Rights.
I'm about to start the meeting, so if you'd like to take your seat.
But he wants...
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Extraordinary Council meeting of the 17th of September 2024. Before we start, I am going to run over what the meeting process will be for our online viewers and members of the public, and also for the committee, for the council. And then we will go to apologies, confirmation of the agenda, declarations of interest, etc. But it's important for me to run through the process, so I will do that now. Council is here to determine complaints received under its Code of Conduct. It is an uncomfortable position for all of us to be in, to determine conduct of a fellow councillor. However uncomfortable that might be, Council is here to discharge its duties. The order of the meeting will be as follows, and is in your run sheet. There is no members speaking in the public forum. We will accept the agenda. I have already been asked to extend the debate speaking time to 3 minutes, so understanding orders will vote on that when that time comes. Welcome to our online viewers as well. We will then move to the report, and the CE and the independent investigator will present the report. Once we have done that, we will move to questions, and we have James McGillivray from Tompkins Wake also at the table. We'll work through all the questions at the same time. Once we have disposed of questions as required and allowed for in the code, we will invite the respondent, Councillor Bidder, as his opportunity to appear and speak in his own defence. At that point, he would have heard all the questions and the council considering the report. To be clear to everyone, stage 5 in the code says that reports will be considered by full council that exclude any interested members, including complainants and the respondent. So that is the process that we will follow today. So do I have any apologies? Yep. Thank you. Is that recorded as an apology?
We'll put it as a conflict of interest and stepping down.
Okay, we'll put that as a conflict of interest when we get to that. Thank you. Everyone here? No, we're missing Councillor Tawariki. Okay, he may be on his way.
Angela, he said that he would be here at 11, so gives apologies for lateness.
So partial, okay, thank you. All right, let's move on to confirmation of the agenda. The agenda is as you see it. There have been no further changes. You have your run sheet in front of you. The only request from Councillor McIndoe is to extend debating time from 2 minutes to 3, so I'm happy to move that. Councillor McIndoe will second that. All those in favour?
Angela, I just want a confirmation, just procedurally, raising issues of conflict. Do you want to manage that under the
that's the
declaration?
next part, which is the declarations of interest. Thank you. Yep.
Right.
So we're nearly there. All those in favour for accepting the agenda as is, please raise your hands. Yes, yeah. Yes. That's carried. We'll do the rest of the votes on the board, which helps our governance team. Right, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest from members? We already have one recorded from Mayor Southgate. Thank you. Councillor Van Osten.
Yes, Chair, thank you. Earlier in the process, I submitted a complaint regarding Councillor Bidder's behaviours, which I later withdrew.
Okay.
So while I come today with an open mind, I think in the interests of good process and for a smoothly run meeting, and also to avoid any perception of bias,
Okay.
I'll withdraw from the meeting,
Yep.
but would like it noted that I am not conflicted.
Okay. All right, thank you, Councillor Van Osten, and you'll be stepping away from the table? Great, thank you. Are there any further declarations of interest from members? There being none? We accept those, don't we? We vote on those? Yeah. So please, oh, no vote required. All right, that's done. Okay, there are no members of the public speaking in public forum. All right. Okay, so we're now on to item 5. And we will first go to, so this is on page 6. And we will go to the CE first. Now, as I laid out earlier, Council, we will hear from the CE, who will briefly introduce the report. We will hear from the independent investigator, Mary Hill. Once we've got, they will stay at the table, and then we will start, move into question time. So thank you, Lance.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Angela. Look, you've got a comprehensive report in front of you today. Look, I'm not going to run through all of that. There's quite a bit of material. I suspect you've all had a good read of that. There's lots of attachments with supporting information. The report outlines the process that's been followed and your options as council once you've considered the independent investigator's report and also Councillor Bidder's response. As per the Code of Conduct, the process started with the preliminary assessment. That is, the complaints were referred to the HCC legal team, and seeing that the Mayor was one of the complainants, it was down to the Deputy Mayor and I to make the preliminary assessment, having considered the recommendation from the legal team as per the Code. Tompkins Wake provided us their assessment, which we carefully considered and asked questions on, and they advised that the complaint could properly be considered a material breach of the Code of Conduct. Remembering that's not a decision, it's actually just part of the preliminary assessment and process. Using that advice, the decision was made for the complaint to be the subject of a full investigation to be completed by an independent investigator for some key reasons. The public nature of the matter and the level of public interest, the number of complaints, and also that the Mayor of Hamilton City Council and also other elected members from Waipa were complainants, noting that the Deputy Mayor and I have to work closely with these people in the future, and that by using an independent investigator, it will remove any possible suggestions that there was any bias involved in the Code of Conduct process. So Mary Hill, who's with us today, was engaged as the independent investigator. You've got her report, and it's now up to you as a body to consider the report from Ms Hill, along with Councillor Bidder's response. I'm not going to go into any more detail. I think the process is reasonably clear from what Deputy Mayor Angela outlined at the start of the meeting, and happy for myself, the legal team or others to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, CE. So, Ms Hill, if you'd like to come up to the table, we'll do questions as I outlined when we've heard all the, and we can make sure those are robust. Thank you. When you're ready, please present your report.
Kia ora tātou, good morning everybody. I am going to largely take the report as read, but I do want to go through a number of key points, and then I'm really happy to answer questions. So the points I wanted to emphasise are in response to matters raised by Councillor Bidder in relation to the draft report that was provided to him to provide comments on. As you are aware, he provided his response through the Chief Executive, and those comments were provided to me and then have been taken into account in finalising my report. So I wanted to start with the issue about the application of the code. So this is the question about whether it applies to a member acting in their private capacity or whether it only applies when they are in an official capacity. And the code itself does directly deal with that issue. I wanted to start with the scope and application of the code. And the introductory wording of the code makes the point that Hamilton City Councillors and the Mayor have an important and privileged role representing the people of Hamilton, so it's a representative role, and that the code, which all elected members sign up to, represents a commitment to maintain high standards of behaviour as public figures. And that is important for their credibility as city leaders and for the reputation of Hamilton. So the point being made here is that elected members have a public role and that the way they conduct themselves affects the reputation of elected members and of the council itself. And so with that rider, the code then deals with the application, and it explains that it does apply to members obviously in their official capacity, but goes on to say that where a connection of any kind can be made between their behaviour in their official capacity, then the code of conduct will apply. And so I have found in my report that although Councillor Bidder was acting in a personal capacity when making the submission to Waipa, it was very clear who he was, and he asked that his submission be made known to the elected members of Waipa, and it was made public. And so I have found that a connection of any kind can be drawn between that conduct made in a private capacity and Councillor Bidder's role as an elected member. And it's very clear from the complaints made that the public found or felt that that conduct brought the office of an elected member and the reputation of Hamilton City Council into disrepute. The second point I wanted to emphasise relates to the lawfulness of the code. So Councillor Bidder makes a point that the code itself is unlawful because it doesn't comply with Clause 15 of Schedule 7 of the Local Government Act. And there's a couple of points to make in response to that. Clause 15 of Schedule 7 of the Local Government Act clearly applies to members in their official capacity, and it requires a code to address those matters, but it doesn't exclude a code of conduct also dealing with the conduct of members in their personal capacity where that might impact on the reputation of that member or the council. Now, Hamilton City Council's code of conduct does squarely deal with the conduct of members acting in their private capacity where that might draw a connection with their role as a member and bring the reputation of the council into disrepute. The second point in relation to that is that if Councillor Bidder wished to raise an issue about the lawfulness of the code, that was a matter to be raised at the time, either when the code was being developed and adopted by the council or when Councillor Bidder was signing up as an elected member and agreeing to abide by the code. It's well settled law that those lawfulness issues need to be raised at the time, not as a defence later to an allegation that the code has been breached. That's known as a collateral attack, and it's not acceptable. So he signed up to the code with the knowledge that it did address conduct where any connection could be made as an elected member, and that is the time to raise the issue, not later. The third legal issue raised relates to the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act. So I think it's important to recognise that this isn't an issue about freedom of speech generally. The issue that you're considering today is how the Hamilton City Council Code of Conduct deals with the issue of freedom of speech. And it deals with it directly, and it provides that elected members, like all citizens, are entitled to freedom of expression, but notes that this comes with a concurrent responsibility to be respectful. And it is the respect provisions of the Code of Conduct that I have found have been breached by Councillor Bidder. So it isn't the case that elected members are not able to express personal views freely. They are, but those come with the concurrent responsibility that as an elected member representing the council, they need to be respectful in the manner in which they express those views. So the Bill of Rights Act does apply to local authority conduct, and the Bill of Rights Act does affirm the right to freedom of expression, but there are reasonable limits on that. So where there are reasonable limits on freedom of expression prescribed by law, those reasonable limits prevail. Now, Councillor Bidder has argued that the Code of Conduct is not law. That is not consistent with High Court authority, so there's a decision that I've referred to in my report, the Golden case, which confirms that a Code of Conduct is law, and that a Code of Conduct can place restrictions on freedom of expression. And that is what the Hamilton City Council Code of Conduct does. So in my view, the restrictions in this code are reasonable, and what they say is yes, you can freely express your views, but you must do those in a respectful manner. Just briefly dealing with process issues, I've gone through those quite carefully in my report, but I want to say for the record that I don't accept that there are any procedural issues in the manner in which I went about my investigation. There are issues raised about timeframes. Over 1 month was given to Councillor Bidder to respond to my preliminary finding, and 11 working days since he had been provided with full copies of all complaints. And then he had 11 working days to comment on a draft report. He was provided with a full copy of my draft report to provide feedback on, and I invited him to either provide written comment, or if he wished to have a discussion with me, I was happy to have a discussion with him about that. So I don't accept that the timeframes were not reasonable. I do want to wholly reject again for the record the allegations that I have falsified complaints and been dishonest. Those are serious allegations, and it's important for me to say for the record that I do not accept those. I was appointed to do my job. I've done it independently and fairly, and I wanted to make that point again. So to wrap up, I have found material breaches of 2 provisions of the code. Those are the provisions relating to respect at section 3.2 and relationship with the public at section 5.2. And those sections are focused on ensuring members are respectful and courteous, do not engage in offensive behaviour, and importantly, ensure that their behaviour in the mind of the public does not undermine council's reputation. I did not find a breach of section 3.5 relating to leadership, because I consider that that provision of the code relates to the governance of council, and Councillor Bidder was not acting in a governance capacity when he made the submission. So I've gone on to make some recommendations. Those are recommendations only, and council is here to make its own decisions about that. But I did just want to clarify that I have recommended 2 matters that would be mandatory in nature, and 3 matters that would be mandatory and 2 that would be voluntary. So the recommendations that I'm suggesting are mandatory are a written censure, so that would record that there have been breaches of the code. I'm also recommending mandatory training, because I think the important distinction here has been missed about the fact that personal behaviour, when done in the name of somebody who's a recognised public figure, does in fact breach the code where that crosses the line into behaviour that undermines the reputation of council in the eyes of the public. And I'm also recommending a mandatory public apology to a disability organisation. And that is the recommendation that's changed since my draft report. My initial view was that unless an apology is genuine, it doesn't have any impact. But there was some strong views from members of the disability community that even if an apology is not genuine to their community, it is still something that would be important to them. So that's why I changed my recommendation in relation to that. But the 2 voluntary recommendations are mentoring, because again, I think it's very important that that there is a connection with a mentor, and if that's not a mutual thing, I don't think that would be of any value. And the apology to Mayor O'Regan, again, I've suggested that that be voluntary. The reason for that is that Mayor O'Regan did not seek an apology, and that if it is not genuine, I don't consider that that would add particular value. But those are matters for you, and I just wanted to highlight the distinction between the different recommendations in my report. That's all I wanted to say. Very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms Hill. Right, and as I outlined at the beginning, we can have questions from Ms Hill, from the CE, and also from Tompkins Wake. So we'll start with questions. Councillor Taylor, you're first up.
Thank you, Chair O'Leary. I think this one's, it's Ms Hill, is that right?
Yes, it is.
I think this one's for you. So under the Code of Conduct, one of the principles to guide any processes for investigating or determining whether a breach has occurred is the right to have one's privacy respected. And in this case, that has not occurred. In fact, I'd suggest it's been blatantly disregarded. What remedy is there for that failure and the way you consider this? It's a clear breach that the privacy has not been.
Yep. For debate.
Sure. If you could just clarify what you think has been a breach of privacy.
That on June the 25th, the Mayor, after making a complaint, then spoke publicly to the media, to Radio New Zealand, about the complaint and the reasons for the complaint.
So it may be more of a question for Tompkins Wake. This was an issue that occurred. I did not investigate that stage of the inquiry.
A question for Tompkins Wake. Welcome to the table.
Thanks, Councillor Taylor. I think the short answer is it's not part of Hamilton City Council's process. We've just followed the process, both at the preliminary investigation stage and at the and Mary's followed the process at her stage. So what complainants do in relation to what they talk about to the media is not something that falls to be considered under the complaint process. We couldn't dismiss a complaint because somebody's spoken to the media at some stage. And there's been people talking to the media about this all over the place. I think Councillor Bitter spoke to the media about it quite early on as well, and provided a copy of the confidential draft report to the media, which shouldn't have happened. So this has been like it or not in the public forum from the get-go. But we can't be distracted from that when carrying out the process that's got to be carried out under the code. You just follow through the process, which is what's been done.
Look, thanks for the answer, but so Section 6 principles, one of the principles there in determining whether a breach under the code has occurred is that the person should have their privacy respected. The first instance of the privacy not being respected was when the Mayor, having lodged a complaint, then spoke to the media. That was before Councillor Bitter was approached.
I am going to just remind members
Well, you haven't answered the question with respect.
Yeah, so legal has answered, but I'm sure he can answer again. We will not have any commentary or debate in the questions. You are required under the code to keep the questions succinct and concise.
You'd agree, Chair, that you
Through
need
the
context,
Chair.
yes? You'd agree that you need context for questions, though, yes?
Yes, you do need context for questions, but I won't entertain allegations of interested parties or anybody else within those questions. So, thank you.
My response for the institution is that the institution has respected the privacy of Councillor Bitter in conducting the process. The process has been conducted as it's meant to be conducted, with confidentiality being respected at all stages by the people running the process.
On the front page of the paper.
As I said, I'm speaking for the institution of Hamilton City Council. I'm not speaking for the individual actions of anyone else.
Or is the Mayor not the leader of Hamilton City Council?
That's a sort of rhetorical question. Of course she is, but as I said, all that I can deal with is the process that the people charged with that process followed, and the Mayor has not been involved in that process at all. Because she's a complainant.
So do you think that the element, that the statement to have their privacy respected should be removed from our principles in our code of conduct? Because it obviously doesn't seem to be important.
It's not really a question for me. This is a code adopted by members. It's for members to determine what's in it. As I said, in following the process under the code, the people involved in running that process have respected people's privacy as they're meant to do.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll address that one in debate. Thanks, Chair. Second question is just in terms of the process. This is probably one for Lance. Lance, in past code of conduct complaints, and I've been involved in a few, unfortunately, there has been the process, the opportunity for complaints to be addressed informally before it goes to the formal process. Did this happen on this occasion?
No, it was discussed by myself and Deputy Mayor O'Leary, as I outlined in the words that I said at the start, and we thought it best that it went to a full independent investigation for the reasons that I outlined earlier on, and one of those was ensuring there was no bias, but the public nature of the matter, the level of public interest, and a number of complaints as well, which is, in my time at council, it's the most complaints I've seen in a code of conduct. So we thought that was the best course of action going forward.
Thanks. Do you think you would have taken that course of action if it hadn't been so public, the matter? Would that have given more opportunity for an informal resolution?
It's always a hard one to weigh up. Possibly.
Right.
Tom, if James, if Tom Wake in the process has a view on that.
Well, as Lance has said, and it wasn't a decision that we made. We didn't give advice on process, merely whether there was a threshold possible material complaint, which we decided there was. But I think what you've got here is a large number of complaints, but also, in my experience, a lot of those complaints where an informal process worked and was thought to be appropriate were situations where there was a practical ability for really two protagonists to sit down and talk to one another, and often when that's happened, a willingness to apologise to some degree, and so there were features of this one that would have made that, I think, quite difficult.
So just a last one on that, Chair. Lance, could you not have approached Councillor Bitter and asked informally for him to apologise?
I could have, but I made the decision not to for the reasons that James has outlined. The likelihood of having a conversation with 24 different complainants and working that through seemed extremely complex to me, and also the complexity with elected members both at Hamilton City Council and Waipa being involved.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Chair. Ms Hill, good morning. I wonder if we could start just referring to our Code of Conduct, page 3, and the application, paragraph 2. In there, and in your early commentary, you speak about the fact that an elected member is captured by the code, and if the elected member was unhappy with the code, they are required to raise that at the time of the code. Your legal argument was that that had to occur when it was introduced, and I think, is that correct? Is that my understanding?
Either when it was introduced or when they were personally making a commitment to abide by it. So when they become an elected member, that's part of that.
And I think you referred to, is it Golden? Is that
the Golden case is slightly different. That relates to the Bill of Rights Act issue. I referred to a legal principle around what's known as a collateral attack, which is a general concept that...
So in terms of a collateral attack, is the member captured by that if they voted for or against the code? So if they, at the time the code is discussed and debated, and members clearly voted against it because they were protesting the code, are they immediately captured by that legal principle?
They're captured by it at the point at which they become an elected member because they agreed to abide by it at that time. So if their objection was such that they did not want to commit to part of it, then they ought not to have become an elected member.
Albeit the code, so you're saying that you can vote against the code, say that you're not going to be bound by the code. Of course, the code isn't provided for commitment prior to standing. You stand, you get elected by the people. So actually, you know, is it not unusual that you are captured with when you've already clearly protested and said you don't agree with it?
I don't think that's an answer because the Local Government Act requires elected members to abide by it. So if they're making a commitment to abide by it, they can't pick and choose.
Can we explore that further? Doesn't the Local Government Act require that a council has a code? Just remind me exactly where it says that an elected member has to support the code.
Yeah, so it's same clause 15 of Schedule 7, sub-paragraph 4. A member of a local authority must comply with the code of conduct of that local authority.
All right, thank you. If we turn to page 9 of the agenda, and I think it's paragraph, well, actually, sorry, no, it's page 11 of the agenda, paragraph 9. To summarise, I think you're basically saying that you didn't conduct any part of the investigation prior to, so the events leading up to receiving the complaint, you weren't involved in the process.
That's correct.
That's correct. But you, on page 18.22, you frequently, point 23, you frequently talk about the members of the public and the volumes of the complaint. And I think the Chief Executive did too. My question is, wasn't there a duty of care for you to have investigated how it became public?
How the complaints became
Yes,
public?
you've relied on the number of complainants.
Yes.
But on one hand, under clause 9, you're saying you weren't required to turn your mind to the process that led to all of these complaints, right? Because it was before you were asked to investigate. But you then rely on the volume of complaints to justify some of your suggested punishments. Wasn't there an obligation for you to investigate how the complaints became public?
Yes, so I did that. So that's addressed at page 14, which is page 23 of the, no, sorry, that's not the correct page, where I went and made inquiries of Waipa.
Yeah.
So at page 13 of the agenda, page 12 and 13, I addressed the process that I went through once the complaints had been referred to me to, first of all, establish how the submission made to Waipa District Council was made public, and also to establish independently the validity of each of the complaints. Is that the point you're asking me about?
Yeah, thank you. So, Mr. could you point to me where in either page 12 or 13 you say how it became public?
You mean the submission made by Councillor Bidder?
Yes.
Yes. So let me just find it. Yeah, so it is. It's at page 13 of the agenda. So my page 4, paragraph D. So I explain in there that WDC elected members were provided with the full unredacted submission following their committee meeting on 18 June 2024. Screenshot of the submission containing the comments with personal details redacted was subsequently circulated to elected members of Hamilton City Council and became public.
Right. So, but up until then, on the public website at Waipa, it was redacted, was it not?
That's my understanding, yes. So there was a lag between it being made, the actual offensive comments having been made public.
Right. So the Waipa website didn't make those public?
That's my understanding, yes.
And up until that point, Councillor Bidder didn't make it public?
I'm not aware of what he did.
But it became public. So did you explore how it became public?
So I explored with Waipa how it became public, and the advice that they gave to me was just as you've said. So initially, their public agenda did not contain the offensive elements of the submission, and that then a copy of the submission with the offensive elements was provided to this council.
No, sorry, just to this council. To who?
To Hamilton City Council.
To who in the Hamilton City Council?
Well, we know that it was provided to the mayor because
Right,
that
so it was sent to the mayor?
And
Because it wasn't sent to me,
and my
elected
understanding was that other council.
Debate that bit.
No, I'm just trying to...
Sorry, Councillor Wilson. You're on to your 13th question, so it might, if you can finish at least this line of questions, it's not questioning, I can allow other members and then I can certainly come back to you.
Absolutely, because I have a number of questions.
I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
Just as
So, sorry,
in the
Ms.
fairness
Hill.
of time.
So you did discover that, in fact, it was sent to the mayor.
That's
what you're saying.
Yes.
And so then the mayor released it to the media. Is that what you understand?
I'm not aware of that, but how it became public, I don't consider as something that I need to investigate. The point is it was made public and people have made complaints in relation to that.
So thank you. So you're saying that the majority of the complaints, because the Chief Executive speaks about the volume of complaints, that occurred once the leak occurred?
I'm not sure what you're referring to in relation to the leak.
Oh, well, sorry, that the Mayor making it public?
We are not, unless it's in the report, we are not making assertions about interested parties.
No, I'm not making
I
an
think it's
assertion.
important to clarify
You
that the
did.
submission itself was public. When Councillor Bidder made it, it was made on the condition that it was a public document that could be circulated to the public. So I don't understand the suggestions about leaks and things like that. It was a public document.
But it wasn't public, it was redacted.
There were aspects of it that were redacted and
Yeah.
then it was subsequently published.
But in your findings, you state that there are two aspects, respectfulness and two, relationship with the public.
That's right.
And so up until the point that a unredacted copy was circulated, there wasn't a relationship with the public.
There was a relationship with the public to the extent that it was a public submission made and there was a request that it be provided to elected members at Waipa, which is a public entity and therefore that is publicly available. Someone could have asked for a copy of it. Members at Waipa made decisions because of the very offensive nature of the submission to redact certain elements, and the document was subsequently made public. That's all I'm going to say.
Okay, thank you. I'll come back. Thank you.
And I just make the note yet again to Council, there is no evidence included in any of these papers on who the party was that may or may not have leaked any unredacted information, so I would ask you to refrain from that particular line of questioning. I'm going to go to Councillor McIndoe. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Miranda Tato, I also have quite a few questions, so if you feel that I've had my share, I'm happy to take a pause, as long as I can ask them all eventually, please. But I appreciate that others need a turn as well. Given that much of this hinges on the idea that the complaint is material under Step 2 of our code, could I just ask in layman's terms, what exactly do we mean by the complaint is material?
I'll have a go at answering that because we generally have to look at the preliminary assessment of these things. It's not a scientifically precise term, Councillor McIndoe. It's an assessment of whether trying to put yourself in the shoes of the reasonable person, you would say, look, this isn't just a technical breach. It's something that someone would consider to be not trivial, not a trivial complaint. So, for example, saying using the word bloody in a sentence might be technically, you know, if you're going to be pedantic about it, use of offensive language, but in context it might be, well, yes, but that's trivial. It's not something that a reasonable member of the public would think was materially offensive. So it's really just a matter of filtering out things that are trivial, not really important. You know, a storm in a teacup. And when we look at advising on preliminary assessments over the years, there are plenty of times where we say, maybe this is a technical breach, but it's not material. So we don't think that it could reasonably be said to amount to a material breach. It's a matter of judgment. This one, well, I'll stop there.
And I would only add that the code itself does give you a definition of materiality.
Yeah, which is why I asked for it in the layman's language, so that everyone can understand. Thank you for that answer. Given that the Deputy Mayor and the Chief Executive obviously were having to deal with the matter and did deem the complaint to be sufficiently material to necessitate legal action, I heard the Chief Executive earlier say that a major part of the reason for making that decision was that there had been a lot of complaints received. What were the other factors that, in your opinion, made it material?
Exactly what was just said by our legal
You
folk.
consider it to be...
If you actually look.
Yeah.
So we got advice from Tompkins Wake. They provided that. It's actually in the material in the report. And Deputy Mayor Angela and I carefully considered that. And it outlined essentially that certain parts around offensiveness and things like that, there could be a material breach of the code. So there's a bunch of things in the code which are outlined, and we went through that with James and the team when they provided their advice. So we had a verbal catch up after they provided their written advice.
Okay, thank you. And going back to one of the questions that one of my colleagues asked before, can I just ask, how much consideration did you give to the option of dealing with this matter effectively in-house in an informal way?
Well, our meeting was a reasonably lengthy meeting, so there was quite a bit of discussion on a whole bunch of points. So I think a fair and reasonable amount of consideration.
So you did really look at this is how it might unfold if we did it that way in-house?
Yeah, and look, I've been involved in a few of these before with a number of elected members, and I think Councillor Taylor pointed out that, you know, sometimes there's a discussion and going down the informal route and that sort of thing, but had a look at that, and for the reasons I outlined before, felt that the independent investigator was probably the prudent way to go.
Thank you. Did Mr. Bidder use or indicate a Hamilton City Council email address anywhere in his submission?
No, it was a personal email address.
Did he use a Hamilton City postal address in his submission?
No, and just to clarify, there's no suggestion that the submission was purported to have been made in his capacity as an elected member. The issue is whether there could be a connection between him personally and his role as an elected member.
Thank you, and obviously that's part of what we're here to ascertain today, because it's going to have a material outcome, I think, a bearing. Did Mr. Bidder mention in his submission that he was a Hamilton City Councillor, or suggest that he was writing in that capacity?
No, I've already answered. There's no suggestion it was made in his capacity as an elected member. That's not what I've found.
Right. Is Mr. Bidder entitled to be considered as any other private citizens would be when writing to Waipa District Council in his capacity as a Waipa ratepayer? And if not, why not?
Can you ask your question again?
Is Mr. Bidder entitled to be considered as any other private citizen would be within the Waipa District or any territorial authority outside Hamilton when writing to Waipa District Council in his capacity as a Waipa ratepayer?
No, I've found that he's not in the same shoes as any other member of Waipa, because he is an elected member who has signed up to a code of conduct that says that if a connection can be drawn between his behaviour and the reputation of him as an elected member and this council, then the code requires him to act in a respectful and courteous manner. So he's not in the same position as any member of the public.
Thank you. Again, on page 22 of the code, in step 2, clause B, was consideration given to the possibility that the complaint was outside the scope of the code and therefore should be directed to another agency or process as stipulated in that section?
That's only because we gave advice on the preliminary issue, and we considered the point and essentially came to the same conclusion that Mary has independently and separately come to herself, which is that a connection was likely to be drawn, would bring potentially the elected member's reputation as an elected member and Hamilton City's reputation into disrepute, and therefore was on balance within scope. So it's a exercise of judgment. We made that call.
Okay, thank you. How much has the investigation cost to date, and are there further costs that are expected before it will be resolved?
Mish, can you give an update on that?
Information to hand, sorry.
Not even an approximate
I wouldn't
estimate?
like to give an approximate. Sorry, councillor.
Perhaps based on previous experience, what might we expect?
We haven't had this experience in my time at council.
I think going forward, it depends on what happens today.
And I appreciate that, but there will have been quite a lot of cost incurred already, regardless of the outcome.
So Councillor
so-
McIndoe asked and answered, and
Yes.
thank you.
So who pays the bill for this investigation?
Well, the ratepayer does.
Yeah, it will be the Hamilton ratepayer?
Correct.
Will either Waipawa District Council or their
No,
ratepayers?
it's the process under the law, under the Code of Conduct and under the Local Government Act, so we're following that.
So I guess this is in some way relating back to a question from Councillor Wilson earlier, but given that Hamilton's ratepayers are footing the bill, was consideration given to inviting all Hamilton elected members to decide whether the matter should be referred to lawyers at considerable cost to ratepayers or dealt with informally?
That's not the process in the code.
But was consideration given to it?
Answered, Councillor McIndoe.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I just heard what Mish said before, but were decisions made in handling this matter consistent with those made in times gone by in respect to complaints about language used by any former councillors of Hamilton in their digital communications or on social media, etc.?
Each complaint that we look at is addressed on its merits. This complaint stands apart in terms of the language used to anything I've seen previously in any previous complaint. So if you're making comparisons, they have to be apples with apples. You look at each one individually and call them as you see them. And some of them are considered not to be breaches of it all. Some of them are considered not to be material. Some of them are considered to be material, and recommendations it's then for the Mayor, Deputy Mayor and CE of the day to decide what they're going to do with the material ones. You just have to make the determination on the behaviour as you see it. But in terms of comparators, in my time of dealing with this, which spans over a decade now, I don't think there's another one that I've seen that quite is in the same category of language as this one.
Thank you. Why is Mr. Bidder referred to as Councillor Bidder throughout the investigator's report?
He is being investigated as a member of Hamilton City Council who signed up to a code of conduct.
But he's not a Waipawa councillor, and this is a matter that was directed to Waipawa members and staff.
Respectfully, that misses the point. He's a Hamilton City Councillor. This is an investigation in relation to whether he's breached the Hamilton City Council Code of Conduct in relation to a public submission made. The point is whether there's a connection between that submission and his personal capacity and his role as an elected member and the reputation of this council, and I have made that point now on a number of occasions.
You say respectfully, I've missed the point, but might I suggest respectfully that this is a matter that we are here to determine and is material? Well, it's a question.
Councillor.
Might
can
I
just
suggest that?
I'm not going to allow that question.
Okay.
Can I just direct members, questions are through the chair and questions of presenters under 21.3 of the standing orders are at the discretion of the chair. Must not be repetitive, must be succinct, clear, unambiguous, and presenters should not be asked to comment on matters to which they have already responded. So please keep that in mind further as we go through. Councillor McIndoe, there's been quite a few questions.
Yes, I'm happy to stand aside at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to now go to Councillor Hutt.
Thank you. On page 134, inside attachment 3, Councillor Bidder's submission, there are comments at the top of the page around members of the public who believe councillors are corrupt and finding against Mr. Bidder have the legal authority to arrest them. They may use reasonable force to do so. And they may do this, they may make a citizen's arrest the next time they meet an elected member. Is this accurate legal information? This is in relation to section 35.
104.
Yes,
Of
but
the
the relevant from the Crimes Act is on the previous page, arrest of persons found committing certain crimes. That's what it's in response to.
No, it's not accurate legal information, and there have been serious allegations made left, right and centre in relation to this, for which there's been, in my view, no reasonable foundation for making. Mary's addressed the ones against her, so no, it's not accurate.
Considering the context in which this is provided both to elected members and to the public on the public record, is this seen as encouraging members of the public to implement a citizen's arrest of elected members who vote in a particular way on this?
It's out of scope, actually. Can we park? I'm not going to allow that question,
Okay.
Councillor Hutt.
I guess my other question on this was, are we safe if this information is being included in this way? Are we safe to vote on this if that is being promoted or suggested as a consequence of voting a particular way?
Let me just... yeah, I was just looking at governance because it would slightly more be a governance question, but it isn't a question that the presenters or staff can answer.
So you can't confirm whether or not it's safe for us to vote on this?
No.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Hutt. Next, just before I go back to either Councillor Wilson or Councillor McIndoe, anyone that hasn't asked questions, there's time and we will take a break shortly. All right. Councillor Wilson, thank you.
Yeah, question to the Chief Executive. Lance, just did Council issue a media release regarding this matter at any time?
Just have to, sorry, I can't recall, but Dan, do you? I'll just get him to come down to the microphone.
We haven't issued a media release on this, but we have responded to media inquiries about the matter.
Thank you. And just on that point, what day did you first get a media inquiry?
I can't answer that off the top of my head.
Okay. Just a quick question, Lance, in addition, have we received any invoices either from Tompkins Wake or from Miss Hill for this work?
I'd have to look at Mish for that.
Yes, we have received some invoices.
Thank you. Could you tell me the total of those invoices?
I don't know that off the top of my head. Councillor Wilson, can I come back to you?
Yeah, Madam Chair, if that would be fine during the break, because that would be good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ms Hill, if I could, just help me with have you done work for Hamilton City Council before?
I am the External Protected Disclosures Officer, but I haven't done work for them. That's another independent office that I hold.
So you haven't done a code of conduct before
No,
for Hamilton?
Not a code of conduct. I've done a number of investigations under the Protected Disclosures legislation.
Excellent. Can I ask Tompkins Wake, in terms of natural justice in the broader definition, is consistency in terms of how similar matters are dealt with an important element of natural justice?
No, natural justice is concerned with the fair process that's followed in relation to the investigation of something and somebody having a right to be heard in this context. Consistency might be more, in some contexts, a matter of substantive justice.
Is it appropriate when determining a recommendation for a course of action to have had some understanding of other recommendations of similar type code of conduct breaches?
No, I don't think that's right. The independent investigator must carry out an independent investigation of this complaint against the code, not an investigation of whether they agreed with previous. But you know, there's not like a set of case law on this in Hamilton City Council it could be referred to. In the time of dealing with this, we've never had a complaint that's needed to go to an independent investigator and gone through this process and had to come back to council for a decision. There's no apple to compare here, I don't think.
Okay, so thank you. So so just for clarity, you're saying that Hamilton City Council has not ever gone to the point of getting an investigator to make a recommendation in the past?
Not in my time of advising on these things, which covers the last decade and more. I don't know about in the long term in the past. I'm not aware of one.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Naidu-Rolfe, you had your... You found... Good. Councillor McIndoe.
Deputy Mayor, and I appreciated your patience earlier and that of our other colleagues. So I will just ask two more questions, if I may.
Certainly.
The first, Ms Hill, in paragraph 50 of your report, which is on page 23 of Diligent, in explaining your reasoning for upholding the complaint, you conclude by saying, my carefully considered and independent view is that the use of highly offensive language in a public submission and making personal attacks on the mayor of a neighbouring council breaches those standards. But wasn't Mr Bidder making a personal attack on his own mayor, not the mayor of a neighbouring council?
Sorry, this has been asked and answered, Councillor McIndoe, and again, understanding orders.
Okay, I'll accept your ruling. And the other question, could I just ask, on pages 131 to 135 of the council report in Diligent, there's a 5-page document there dated the 2nd of September 2024, but it has no title. Can somebody explain who was the author or the organisation that provided? It's the document on pages 131 to 135 in Diligent. It's a 5-page document dated the 2nd of September 2024.
That's Councillor Bidder's submission to this meeting.
So why is his name not appear? Doesn't his name not appear on it? Where?
Staff report in the Diligent at the bottom of page, bear with.
His name appears on something at the bottom of page 130.
But it
So
says
this is
on
all
page
part
9 of Diligent, Councillor McIndoe, and for members of the public, it says under attachment 3, Councillor Bidder submission.
Sorry, when I read through all of the different submissions were online, and it appeared to me just another one, and I knew why the others were redacted.
It's marked as attachment 3.
I apologise, thank you.
That's
I guess the fact that it says against Andrew Bidder doesn't step out that it's his document.
Yep. He hasn't got his name on the board. Back to Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess just clarification, Madam Chair. Thanks for your patience. We will be having a break soon to get the information regarding the cost.
The costs can be circulated, sure.
No,
I
staff-
don't think
Madam Chair, the
that's part
staff-
of the, staff are going to circulate the costs. I'm not going to allow questions of the costs because it's not part of the scope of
I'm
today's
not asking
report.
the question of the
So-
cost. I'm entitled to...
So my answer was yes.
Great, so we'll get that at the break.
So I said yes.
Great.
I'm just considering, it is
I've
only,
got a
we have
question,
only,
Madam Chair.
sorry, yes, I know, Councillor Wilson, we have only been sitting for 65 minutes. So if we're soon to dispose of questions, which we may not be, then I was intending to invite Councillor Bidder to make his statement, but I will see how many more. We may break before that. I'll see how the questions go. Sorry, Councillor Wilson, you had a final question?
Yeah, thanks. A question to Mish, if I could.
Yeah.
Mish, in your capacity, you would have obviously had an opportunity to review a number of code of conduct complaints.
I have, yes.
Thank you. Have we ever, in say the last 10 years, had any? I just want clarification. Has there ever been a case where we've asked for an investigation to be made?
I started with council in 2020, so I can't comment on the last 10 years.
Right, but have you had an opportunity to look, during your time here, to look at cases before?
I am aware of other cases, but I haven't looked.
Councillor Wilson, I can just clarify that I've been given some information that there was one in 2020 that was initially referred to an investigator, but an agreement was reached in relation to the protagonists before it got off the ground, so that no investigation report was completed or had to come back to council.
Thank you, that's what I was looking for. So quickly to the Chief Executive, in the case of the one at 2020, could you explain what the resolution was?
Those parties and interested parties of that complaint aren't here, so I'm not going to allow that question of staff, Councillor Wilson, and that's my final decision on that matter. Precedence is not a matter for today. Right, Councillor Pike.
Has Councillor Wilson finished his line of questioning?
Oh, I'm sure he'll have some more later, but for now, I think it's good to share the load. Councillor Pike.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Most of my questions have been answered. But can I have confirmation that there was a private session held by Tompkins and Wake provided specifically to Hamilton City Council elected members about how they can determine whether they're acting in the capacity of an elected member or as a private citizen?
Not that I was involved in. I know that at the start of triennium there are sort of sessions with external counsel, and I know that Lachlan Muldowney has run some of them in the past. It may be that somebody else from my firm ran one of or participated in one of those sessions, but I didn't, so I can't help you beyond that, I'm afraid.
Do you mean during the induction?
Yeah, it was early on in the process and in Committee Room 1. My line of questioning is very much in regards to the content of that information session, which could
Possibly, I can't recall.
guide. I did check diligent, but I couldn't.
Councillor Pike, any further questions?
I guess that, yeah, stymies my ability. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. My question is good morning, Ms Hill. My question is in regard to paragraph 24 of your report, where it speaks about the connection of any, where a connection of any kind can be made to the member of behaviour of an elected member in their official capacity. So I'm just interested, do you think that the close working relationship that Hamilton City Council and Waipa District Council has is relevant when assessing this, connection?
Yes, I do, and the fact that the submission asks that it be particularly drawn to the attention of members and that Councillor Bidder's name be drawn to their attention, and the fact that complainants have specifically addressed that issue was relevant.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the suggested penalties or courses of action, at paragraph 40A(b), you've said it may be useful for all elected members to attend training, relevant training. What is your reasoning for that?
For a start, I think it's always useful. Perhaps it relates to Councillor Pike's comments or where she was heading, but there are very clear categories of when you're acting in an official capacity. There are very clear categories of when you're acting in a personal capacity, but I acknowledge that it's less clear when we're acting in a personal capacity and looking to see whether there's that connection back to your role as an elected member, and importantly whether the conduct might bring the council into disrepute. And I think that issue in particular is worthy of further training so that there's a better understanding about that.
Yep, thank you. I don't have any other questions at the moment, Deputy Mayor. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions, possibly only one, before I finish the questions with Councillor Wilson. In Councillor Bidder's submission, he makes a statement, no, pardon me, that's been asked. Actually, do you know what? All my questions have been asked in your presentation or other questions, so thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks. Question to Mish, if I could. Mish, have you sent an email to an elected member stating that if an email or an activity is done either on their private email address or on their private Facebook page, then there isn't a connection to your role as a city councillor?
I might have sent something along those lines, or exactly on those lines, to Dave McPherson.
Thank you. In light of that, Ms Hill, can I have again your view of how, when we've had suggestions from staff, which is where we go to get clarity, that staff have said in the past, if it's issued from your private email or your private Facebook page, there isn't a connection, and how that conflicts with the application on page 3, where you've said where a connection of any kind can be made. Is there are you concerned in light of the fact that staff have given that advice and that's totally the opposite how you've concluded your investigation?
I'm not going to give my view on whether I'm concerned about the nature of staff's advice. I have formed my own view having given careful consideration to the way that this code is framed, and the importance of the impact of conduct from the public's perspective and the emphasis on those elements of this code, that in my view, this code, the connection comes where, in the eyes of the public, the conduct brings the reputation of the council into disrepute. So clearly there is a connection when members of the public are seeing the conduct in a personal capacity as having a bearing on their role as an elected member, and many of the complaints raised that particular issue.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hutt.
May I offer information on Councillor Pike's question about the 2 briefings?
No, perhaps do that in the break.
Okay.
Yeah. Right, I'm going to wind up questions. Yes, I see Councillor Thompson there. We've been going for an hour and 20 minutes on questions. So, well, slightly less than that because we had presentations, and then we're going to break for morning tea. Councillor Thompson, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My question was to Mish whether it would be possible to see, understand the difference between the wording of the current Code of Conduct and the Code of Conduct last term in respect to that particular issue around the connection between behaviour in a private or official capacity.
So I think you're referencing the decisions made under the code that was pre-May 2022. The report to council that outlines the changes that the council of the day wanted to make to the code is still online. So there is a tracked changes version that's in the agenda that's online. It's probably, given the length of time that we've spent today, I'd suggest that it would be good to maybe have a look at that in the break, because that's the code. So, sorry, the code that applies now is different to the code that applied then.
Cool. Thank you.
Councillor Pike?
Sorry, just a quick question following that. So in light of those changes, would you not give the same advice to any elected members who came with a similar request to you in the current code?
I'm not entirely sure that I can answer that question, Councillor. We use Tompkins Wake for advice quite deliberately to ensure that the elected members have some confidence that there's no bias on behalf of staff. So I don't know that I can comment on whether I'd give that advice or not.
Thank you. No worries.
Very quick question, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Very quick and last question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can staff clarify the latest iteration, Mish, of our code? What date is it?
May 2022, I think.
The 12th of May 2022?
Front of
Yeah,
the cover.
so this is the most recent code?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Perfect. That's, yeah.
Thank you. Right. That is all the questions that we have, and that is all the questions that I'm going to allow for the day. There are other parts of the agenda we need to move into. I am going to thank both Tompkins Wake and Ms Hill for presenting the reports and discharge them. We're going to stop till 11:10. When we come back, I'm going to invite Councillor Bidder to the table, and he is going to present his statement. The process for that is us to listen. There are no questions allowed under the Code of Conduct of Councillor Bidder, and Councillor Bidder is able to present his defence, and there will be no points of order. We will just sit and we will listen to his statement. So let's do that. Let's break till 11:10. Thank you. and thank you everyone. Hopefully you're all refreshed. We will continue with the process and the meeting today. Now, just letting you know, I am aware that there is an amendment floating around. There is also a motion, so governance will work on those. But now... Right, so now we will move to the next part, which is to invite Councillor Bidder. Having heard Council consider and deliberate, he is able to present his submission to Council. So, Councillor Bidder, thank you.
Why? Why is Hamilton City Council dealing with this matter? Some of the public might think it is because I am an elected member of Hamilton City Council. This is about a private submission from a private residence of Waipa Council to a Waipa Council computer server from a Waipa property about a Waipa Council matter using a private computer in my private time. Even the investigator, whom I will demonstrate has a clear bias, concludes that I was acting in my private capacity. Some of the public might even make the mistake of thinking it is something to do with the language I used. No, neither of those is correct. This is entirely a political attack on me that has caused collateral damage amongst the public, in particular the disabled community. Their anger might be righteous, but it is misdirected. For the record, I am genuinely sorry for any hurt caused to the public, but it is not my action for which an apology is needed. It is somebody else's, and we are about to find out who. I have asked why. I will now ask what. What are we doing here? Let's look at the very first line of the Code of Conduct. Go to Section 1. The Code is required to follow the Local Government Act, Schedule 7, Clause 15. Simple. It's not hard to find. Google it. For the public and the press, you can get the agenda for this meeting from the Council website. Under Councillor Bidder's submissions, you will find detailed documents where I've assembled all of this for you. The second line of the Local Government Act, Schedule 7, Clause 15, Part 2A, the Code of Conduct refers only to actions in the capacity of the elected member. Gosh, that's pretty easy. As the investigator said, I was acting in my personal capacity. I was not acting in the capacity of an elected member. Great. The Code of Conduct doesn't apply. EGM over. We can all go home. Just in case some of you have doubts, I've put an email in the agenda, attachment 3, which I assume you've all read, which was to another councillor from our very own legal team. Acting in a private capacity is not subject to the Code of Conduct. Which one of you is claiming our own legal team got it wrong? Hamilton City Council staff know this. So what are we doing here? The Mayor also knows this. In fact, she dealt with former Councillor Dave McPherson on 12 separate complaints in the last term, all of which were rejected. And we're going to look at one now, or hear about one, which was sent to a Maori woman. Paula Southgate determined this was acceptable, rejected the complaint, so I must be justified in repeating it. And remember, Tompkins Wake said my submission stands apart and hasn't been this bad in a decade, so this must be nothing in comparison. To the Maori woman, you silly wee man, no wonder you're a right whinger. And I'm quoting here, fuck off. And when you get there, fuck off too. Then fuck off some more. Keep fucking off until you get back here, then fuck off again. That complaint was rejected because he sent it from his private Facebook account. So what are we doing here? We are playing a dirty game of politics. Some of you may claim that the Code of Conduct was changed since Dave Mack did that. To quote Dave Mack again, this time from a council email address. Bullshit. The change was to allow public to complain. There was no change to the areas of conduct which I am accused about. I am going to dwell on this dirty political game, namely double standards. Some of Dave Mack's abuse was done from council emails about council business. He most definitely broke the Code of Conduct. Complaints were received, yet every time council staff and or the mayor rejected the complaints. Because Dave Mack was on the mayor's political side. There is no moral high ground here. The double standard is evidence in the investigator's report. She could win a gold medal for mental gymnastics at the Olympics. I refer you to my letter to the Chief Executive in the agenda about the investigator's report. I refer you to the legal advice I received in the essential information document. The Code of Conduct is a council document. It is subject to the Local Government Act and cannot override the New Zealand Bill of Rights, Section 14, Freedom of Expression. We have heard some disagreements about that. The Bill of Rights somehow doesn't apply. Well, you can't contract out of the Bill of Rights. It does apply. We've heard about the High Court Golden case. That does not set a precedent for this because it deals with different issues. The investigator did not discuss those different issues. This is not just the perception of bias. This is the stench of double standards, which is hardly surprising given the Mayor gave public statements about the matter. So much for my privacy. Any consultant to the council knew exactly the outcome the Mayor wanted. So what are we doing here? There is no case to answer. There was no Code of Conduct breach because it doesn't apply to this matter. It is not a question of whether you disagree with my actions, found my language offensive, don't like me as a person, oppose my political views, or any other reason. There is nothing in law for you to act on. But I'm going to continue because I am sick of dirty politics and we are going to air council's dirty laundry in public. I have asked why, I have asked what. I am now asking who. Who was wrong? We're going to start with my language. Words matter. Some words more than others. The Local Government Act, Section 82, Principle of Consultation, has some pretty important words. Waipa Council ignored those words. They broke the law. It was the third time they had done it in 2 years. Why? Because councils always get away with it. We, the public, don't have deep pockets to take councils to court. We, the public, get to vote out our politicians once every 3 years, but we can't get rid of staff. We, the public, are angry at being ignored. We, the public, I am in Waipa as a ratepayer. I am Waipa Public. This was a Waipa Council matter. And Waipa set out to destroy the property values of around 100 families. Here is the truth. The infamous bridge location was used to justify a plan to remove 300 car parks from the Cambridge Central Business District. This was 20-minute city in action, and they were making the decision for us. Waipa was wrong. 500 angry residents turned up to a public meeting. I could argue that the bad language was justified. Now, you may disagree with that and say there are better ways. 71% of Hamilton voters think the council doesn't listen to them, and even voting doesn't matter. My experience of over 20 years of fighting with councils is that they are right. But that is an argument for another day, because the bad language doesn't exist. Let me repeat that. The bad language doesn't exist. Or more specifically, my bad language doesn't exist. My submission was automatically redacted under Waipa Council's policy. There was never any way for the public to read it. There was never any possibility of offence. A dozen other people made similar submissions with similar redactions. The submission was made in early March. Waipa Mayor Susan O'Regan removed the redactions against her own council's policy. She sent a digitally altered screenshot where the spelling of two words was altered, changing their meaning. She sent that to Paula Southgate 12 weeks later, just in time to distract from Waipa's massive rates rise. O'Regan created the offensive work, which is why she didn't make a complaint. That's a bit of a giveaway. Paula Southgate released it to the media. Now, this is where things get really interesting. Thanks to the official information, I have a text message from Southgate to O'Regan where Southgate considers the language to be offensive. By spreading it publicly, she knew she would cause offence. The Code of Conduct, Section 5.2, requires Southgate to interact with the public in a fair, respectful, equitable and honest manner, and in a way that upholds the reputation of the local authority. I did not interact with any of the complainants. Southgate interacted with them through her public release and public speaking. All offence that occurred was as a result of her actions. None of the offence that occurred was a result of my decision. I did not choose to remove the redactions. I did not choose to spread it publicly. Even if I had acted in my capacity as an elected member, I still would not have breached the Code of Conduct because of the automatic redactions. But the Code of Conduct got broken and people got hurt, and an apology is required. Why, what, who? Now when? When are we going to finish? Not yet. This case has been well and truly answered. We could end here, but we are going to look at the process, because the failure by a council to carry out proper process must never be allowed to happen again. The New Zealand Bill of Rights, Section 27, right to justice, requires the principles of natural justice to apply to any determination by council. There's not just a final determination at this extraordinary general meeting. It is any decision along the way. This is also written into the Code of Conduct and the terms of reference for the investigation. The principles of natural justice include due process, right to be heard, reasonable timeframes, freedom from bias, transparency. You will see in Appendix 1, Attachment 2, the terms of reference, which includes a summary of the complaints. The first one is by Paula Southgate. All but one of the remaining complaints did not refer to clauses in the Code of Conduct as required. They cannot be accepted. Code of Conduct Schedule 3, Step 1B. The onus is on the complainant to ensure that they have referred to the relevant section of the Code of Conduct that they are claiming to have been breached. The point is so important that the investigator, Ms. Hill, lied about it. In her draft report, she deliberately changed the wording. For those of you who actually read the documents I submitted, you will know that I am referring to 11 Part A, Paragraph 2. She changed ensure to identify. Ensure is absolute. Ms. Hill cannot find it was clear enough. The Council's legal team knows this. The Council's legal team gave a press release stating there were 23 complaints, when Michelle Hawthorne knew this was not true. The Council's legal team was biased from the start. Due process was not followed. The complaints were not given to me at the start. I could not check them, so I demanded that they were checked, vetted, verified, validated. I have been dealing with council deceit for 20 years. There was a simple way of checking the system. I got a friend to make a fake complaint with deliberate errors of fact. She was never contacted for verification. The Code of Conduct process section Step 4.9a establishes the first step for the investigator is to assess whether each complaint is frivolous or without substance and should be dismissed. So her job was to validate each and every complaint. Transparency, one of the principles of natural justice, means the obligation is on the investigator to provide proof that the validation process has been carried out. Ms. Hill did not do so until I questioned it. She then replied, "I am satisfied that the complaints are valid." Thanks to my friendly complaint, I knew this to be false. I told Ms. Hill about the fake complaint. All of a sudden, things changed. A couple of complaints were dismissed, which proves my point. I was finally sent the allegedly verified complaints on Thursday, July 25 at 6:33 p.m, while being given until 4 p.m. on Friday, July 26 to respond. Less than a day. You all know this, except for Councillor Maria, because I copied the email to you. This was a clear breach of the Bill of Rights, reasonable timeframes. Yet in her report, Ms. Hill acknowledged 4 other complaints that failed to meet the criteria and references a number of others, some of which she changed so that she could accept them. I still do not know which, if any, of the complaints are valid. This means her analysis is based on some or possibly all invalid complaints and is therefore invalid itself. My letter to the Chief Executive details other blatant breaches. The letter was in response to her draft report. In her final report, Ms. Hill accuses me of being inaccurate in my criticisms, yet she changed her final report for each of them, obviously because I was right. There reaches a point where incompetence of such a degree or quantity must be considered as corruption. I have not bothered to address the final report because this process has been a deliberate waste of my time, and I have highlighted only a few of the failures. Even if I had acted in my capacity as an elected member, and even if I had been the one to cause offence, then the option before you to receive the report would still not be your choice. You cannot legally receive a report that is so corrupt. But wait, there's more. We have dealt with the investigator, and I am letting her off lightly. I could go on for another hour about the blatant bias. However, let us have a look at our own council staff. The Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act is essential for democracy. The public can have no faith in council if there is no transparency. I made official information requests for evidence that is vital to my defence and vital to the investigation. Hamilton City Council illegally withheld that evidence until after the investigation was completed. You know this because I emailed you with the council's own statements about it. Some of the evidence was eventually released. I asked for all correspondence between Hamilton City Council and Waipa District Council related to this matter. I sent the request to both councils at the same time. The responses should have been identical because correspondence is a two-way record. I got 40 pages from Hamilton and 83 pages from Waipa. There were some very interesting omissions. I also asked for the complaints against Dave Mack that I referred to earlier. As I noted in my email to you, the official information was partly refused because of information that I did not ask for. I will repeat that. They delayed it because they refused to give me information that I did not ask for. How is that sensible, logical, a reason for anything? There is a 20 working day limit to respond, and our staff broke the law. I only got last term's complaints. It was enough for the clear precedent to be established. And precedents are important. Precedents do apply. Precedents set the standard of behaviour, which is precisely why the information was withheld. Even if I had acted in my capacity as an elected member, and even if I had been the one to cause offence, and even if you could receive the report, which you can't, you cannot legally accept the findings when council staff have withheld evidence for my defence. I could go on for another hour about the blatant bias, but I'm letting staff off lightly. Now let us step back and look at the whole thing. It is best summed up by Local Government Minister Simeon Brown, who said in response to this event, "Managing a diverse range of views and personalities around the council table can be challenging, but it is also a key feature of our democratic system." You may not like me, you may not agree with what I said, but this is a part of democracy. Precisely because Southgate knew that the Code of Conduct did not cover this event, she wrote to Minister Brown on July the 5th, before the investigation properly got underway. He replied, "I appreciate your request to review the Local Government Act with regard to the elected members' Code of Conduct. However, elected members are elected by and are accountable to their community. They are entitled to their opinions and can publicly express their views." It couldn't be more clear. I ask you again, why are we here? Why was public money wasted on this process? Why did council staff keep pushing ahead with it? You all know the answer to that. In conclusion, before you today is a staff motion to A, receive the report. You do not have a choice, you cannot do so. B, C and D, consider the findings. You cannot do so. There should be an elected member motion to reject the complaints on the grounds that the Code of Conduct did not apply. You should throw in an amendment to reject the complaints because they were never verified. You should foreshadow an amendment to reject the whole process under the Bill of Rights for breaching the principles of natural justice. I'm not saying I want to get off. I want a proper process that follows precedents without the political backstabbing to get a real outcome. And maybe we could do that outside the limitations of the Code of Conduct. To avoid any doubt, this extraordinary general meeting is a result of gross breaches of due process by some Hamilton City Council elected members, staff and consultants. I have given staff and elected members several opportunities to address the breaches, but they've been ignored. Therefore, I will remind this chamber of your legal obligations. You are performing a statutory duty. The statutory duty is defined by the Local Government Act. I refer to the exact clauses in my submission, which I assume you have all read. Failing to perform a statutory duty due to incompetence is misfeasance. Failing to perform a statutory duty due to corruption is malfeasance. I've outlined corruption by an official as defined in the Crimes Act. It applies here. I've sent you emails and provided enough information in my agenda submission that none of you can claim ignorance or acting in good faith relying on advice from other consultants or staff, or any excuse if you fail to perform your statutory duty. Doesn't matter if you disagree with what I wrote to Waipa, if you found it offensive, if you don't like me, if you oppose my politics, if you want to side with Paula, if you want to side with Waipa, or if you are defending disabled people or anything else. The evidence is clear and I will be blunt. Because regardless of what I did in Waipa, I've been attacked in Hamilton. That's not acceptable. Consider this a learning exercise. Getting elected to council is not a popularity contest for ugly people. It is a serious job. You need to ensure the processes you yourselves follow, as well as staff, are followed properly. Lastly, you've noticed the growing animosity towards councillors across the country. There is real harm in the costs of rates and debt, combined with a level of interference in lifestyle, building and travel that is causing the anger. Don't ignore it. Listen to the angry people. I will always work for the people first, and the people have a right to expect everyone in council to do the same. I'll finish there.
Thank you. Right, we will get the motion and the amendment up on the board.
Following up on
yes.
Costs.
Oh, sorry, yes. And I'm happy to make a note if council's willing to have this reported through to the Finance Committee once it's complete. The current invoiced costs are $21,566, excluding GST to date. So if we can just make a note that the complete costs of this process when we have that information to be reported through to the Finance Committee. There'll be no further questions on that because that's all the information that we have. So 21,566.
Point of clarification.
Yes.
What dates do the invoices cover?
Well, I don't think we have that.
Well, we must have, because we've got the quantum.
Well, yeah, but I'm not going to open questions on that. That's why I thought it's best to have, that was the question asked. We have the answer now. And for complete information, governance can, so, okay, so it would have been from when we received the first complaint till
today?
Now. Or prior to today, I would expect.
It would have been prior to today.
Yeah.
Because the invoices come in.
So we've made a note on the minutes.
Thank you.
And that can be followed up further.
Yep. Thank you.
Right, so we're now going to get a motion which is moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Thompson on the board, and then there is an amendment from Councillor Wilson. I haven't seen who's seconding it. Now, for members of the public and particularly for members online, I'm going to read the motion and the amendment so that it can be followed through and you can follow how the debate's going as well. We will debate both of those together. So first of all, for members listening online, the motion reads as follows, and it's, as I said, it is moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Thompson. The motion receives the report, considers the investigator's report and accepts the finding of the investigator's report, determines the following penalties as recommended in the investigator's report be imposed. 1. Issues a formal letter of censure to Councillor Bidder that includes advice that any further conduct of this nature is likely to result in more serious penalties. 2. Notes that a letter of censure shall include the decision of Council on the outcome of the Code of Conduct complaints and any penalties imposed, and that a letter be signed by the Deputy Mayor on behalf of Council. 3. Requests Councillor Bidder attend relevant training which may cover matters such as conduct expected of elected members, including dealing with members of the public and the media, and the requirements of the Code to be completed by 1 December 2024. 4. Roman numerals. Requests Councillor Bidder tender a written apology to Waipa District Council Mayor Susan O'Regan by 17th, can you add by, 17th of October 2024. And 5. Requests Councillor Bidder, and yet that's grammar's not right, to make, there's a B in there, to make a public apology to Cerebral Palsy New Zealand and IHC by 17th of October 2024, and notes that the censure and penalties are proportionate to the behaviour that is found to be in breach of the Code. I will just take a second and then I will read for online viewers the amendment.
Madam Chair, would you be willing to give me 5 minutes just to finalise whether we intend to put an amendment? I just...
Oh, certainly.
With this clarification
okay.
and what Councillor Bidder has stated, I just need a moment if
yes,
that would be possible.
Yes, I'm very happy to do that.
Thank you.
We'll just take a 5-minute adjournment. There's B in there. Okay, great, we're done. Right, just for the purpose of the public and members watching online, we do often, when we want to get to decisions to be possibly as consensual as possible, we do often break and members with differing views encourage others to perhaps change motions or amendments. The motion by myself and Councillor Thompson has not changed, other than we have added one line at the bottom that says Council will review the relevant sections of the code for the purposes of providing clarity for when a connection exists between an elected member's private and official capacity. So myself and Councillor Thompson were happy to add that in. The substantive items in the motion that we're putting have not changed. Now, we have an amendment on the board moved by Councillor Thompson, Councillor Taylor. I'm going to put that on the board in a second and read it, and then we will look for a seconder. It's all right. Thank you. Councillor Pike will second the amendment. Yes, I will read that out. Right, the amendment is as follows: that the Council notes the report and notes that the Council will review relevant sections of the Code of Conduct for the purposes of providing clarity for when a connection exists between an elected member's private and official capacity. For the members of the public and online, it is important to note that the amendment does not accept the findings of the investigator's report, nor does it put forward any penalties. So that's a substantive difference. Right, so as the mover, I will speak first, and as the mover of the amendment, I will then go to Councillor Taylor. Then I'll go to Councillor Thompson as the seconder to the motion, and anyone else. And debate is 3 minutes. I ask you to take a moment to cast your minds back when you used language that Councillor Bidder used to someone in your community, and I expect most of us can't because we know this behaviour is wrong. Councillor Bidder's submission time was spent evaluating a different code, not the current code under this council, adopted by this council. Today we confront a matter that has brought this council into disrepute. The independent investigation into Councillor Bidder's conduct has revealed behaviour that is unacceptable and unworthy of an elected representative. The language used, which is a matter of fact, by Councillor Bidder was offensive, derogatory and entirely inappropriate to anyone, for anyone, let alone someone in public office. This behaviour does not reflect the values of this council, nor does it align with the standards expected by the community that entrusted us with these roles. As elected officials, our words carry weight, and when used callously or with malice, undermine our collective work, our credibility, and the very trust that underpins our democracy. As an elected representative, Councillor Bidder's actions crossed a line that should not be crossed. A line that is there for a reason. We must hold ourselves and each other to account. We must lead by example, showing restraint, showing professionalism and respect in all our dealings. This is non-negotiable. As chairperson of this meeting, I offer a sincere apology to all those affected by this behaviour. It is deeply disappointing that it's taken this long to receive any form of an apology from Councillor Bidder himself. But it is crucial that Council recognise the hurt and damage caused. So to our community, our colleagues and our staff, I extend my deepest apologies on behalf of this council. As we deliberate on the appropriate response to this breach, I urge my elected members to consider the message we send to the public and to each other. We must uphold the dignity of this council. There can be no tolerance for conduct that degrades this institution or disrespects those we are here to serve. Councillor Taylor, as the mover of the amendment.
Thank you, Chair O'Leary. Look, Councillor Bitter shouldn't have used that language, full stop. It shouldn't be used anywhere, even in a pub, let alone in a submission to a council. He has apologised today. Personally, I think he should have apologised earlier. But I have a fundamental problem, both with the findings of the investigation and in particular with the whole process followed here. It seems very clear to me from the Code of Conduct that as it is at the moment, it only applies to elected members in their official capacity. And as such, I don't accept the investigators' findings. And I note that in the motion, there is a clause there to review the Code of Conduct, which says to me that no one's quite sure. And I'm really disturbed that unlike all the other Code of Conduct processes which I've been involved in, and there's been a few, for some reason this one has been conducted in the public eye right from the get-go. And I don't think that's been any accident. Personally, I think it's been a bit cynical and calculated, and I think it's brought the whole process into disrepute. Section 6 of our Code of Conduct says the party who is the subject of the complaint should have their privacy respected. That's explicit. Well, that hasn't occurred in this situation. In fact, Councillor Bitter's privacy has been deliberately, blatantly compromised, in my view. And thanks to these actions, Councillor Bitter has basically already been publicly tried and found guilty. And that is a complete lapse in natural justice. And I'm somewhat astounded that it seems to have been conveniently swept aside and ignored in investigations into this matter. That's a pretty dangerous precedent going forward. So are we saying in every Code of Conduct going forward, it doesn't matter if the person's publicly outed first? That seems to be what we're saying. And secondly, I am just really disappointed that there was no attempt here to resolve this informally. And this has happened in all the complaints that I've been involved in, and why that hasn't happened on this case concerns me even more, particularly after what seems to me a politically motivated attack. It was all made public right at the start. I mean, how can it not be prejudicial at that point? So I just find this really, I think it's unfair, and I think it doesn't follow natural justice, and I am not prepared to accept this finding and the process. If we are going to have a Code of Conduct, we better make sure it's squeaky clean and actually follows the rules. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I'm just going to go to Councillor Thompson. You don't have to now, as the seconder of the motion.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. I think it is unfortunate that we all are here today. It's not something that is comfortable or that most of us want to be spending time discussing, but it is here in front of us now, and we do have public complaints. And so we do have an obligation to those who did complain to follow the existing Code of Conduct process. So while I do understand where Councillor Taylor is coming from in terms of having wanted a more informal resolution, there were a large number of public complaints that made that difficult compared to where a complaint was between a couple of elected members, where one would have expected a negotiated outcome. As elected members, we have a real position of privilege and we have a position of influence. And our behaviour does set a standard for others within the community. And we need to be really careful that we set the right standard when it comes to how people interact with council staff, with councillors, instead of potentially saying it's okay to act in this way, particularly toward council staff. So I do think that we do need to respond to the public complaints, even though this is an uncomfortable process, and we can't ignore that. And I think that what's been put forward in the motion is proportionate in terms of asking for formal apologies and also for asking for training. And in terms of the final part of that motion that was agreed on with other elected members to be added in terms of reviewing, just to ensure that it's really clear for anyone reading the Code of Conduct going forward where the line is drawn. But today we're making a decision on this Code of Conduct, and I do think that it is clear that there was a connection between the behaviour and the elected members' official capacity. We have a very close working relationship with our neighbouring council, and we work with them on multiple issues, on boundaries, on other things. And the submission was public. It was clear that it would be a public document. And so I think it was pretty obvious that there would be offence, but it would also relate back to our relationship between our two councils. So in closing, I will be supporting the motion today. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I'll move on to other speakers now. Councillor McIndoe.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Let me say at the outset that I deplore the language used by Andrew Bidder in his submission to Waipawa Council. I've told him that privately, and I say it again today in this public forum. I think most people would agree that it was insulting and deeply offensive, not only to those to whom it was directed, and I fully understand why they would have been very upset by it. I think any of us would have been distressed to have been on the receiving end of such a tirade. If the comments had been signed Andrew Bidder, Hamilton City Councillor, or written on council letterhead, or been sent to anyone within Hamilton City Council, then I accept that it would have been a matter within our jurisdiction for us to investigate and take appropriate action if the complaint had been upheld. But I respectfully disagree with the investigator in my submission that that is not the case in this matter. I'm sure we all condemn the language that was used and distance ourselves from it. But if we accept that the comments were made by a private citizen resident in another territorial authority's area and to that territorial authority, not the one for which we have governance oversight, I do not believe that this is a matter for this council to adjudicate over or for which our ratepayers should have to pay such a significant cost. It is essentially a Waipawa matter, yet Waipawa District Council is not investigating it and their ratepayers are not paying for it. I think there's a flaw in our system that enables expenditure of a significant sum of ratepayers' money without the authorisation of all elected members. We are all responsible to our residents and ratepayers for how we spend their money, and has there ever been a time when they have expected more prudence and restraint from us in doing so? I'm firmly of the view that we should not have spent their money on this matter. The issue has been widely reported and debated on social media and in numerous conversations. Regardless of the outcome of today's hearing, what will change? What consequences will there be for Mr. Bidder that we could not have determined informally at minimal cost? Few people in our region can be unaware of the matter, and Andrew Bidder has already been judged by most in the court of public opinion. Many may express their verdict next year at the ballot box. Realistically, there is nothing we as a council can do in this matter beyond disassociating ourselves from the comments and repeating the sympathy we feel for those who were on the receiving end of them. As councillors, we do need to tighten the rules to ensure that we have better, more transparent and democratic procedures in future to avoid committing our ratepayers to expenditure that achieves nothing that can't be achieved without involving lawyers. So I am of the view that this matter is ultra vires, outside the jurisdiction of Hamilton City Council, and we should not therefore be litigating it, nor should our ratepayers be paying for it. The most appropriate response, of course, is for Andrew Bidder to withdraw the offensive comments and apologise to the Waipara elected members and staff who received them, as well as the wider community who have been upset by them. So I was relieved to hear him do that this morning. But I say that as a private citizen, expressing a personal viewpoint, not as someone who has any authority to direct him in this matter.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Pike.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Let me be extremely clear. Councillor Andrew Bidder's submission sent to Waipara Council was frankly disgraceful and unacceptable. It contained language that was derogatory and offensive to valuable members of our community, and he should know better than to weaponise them to attack another person. Then these words had been given in the media, adding to potential offence cause. And so I want to personally apologise to any members of the public who are offended as a result of this process. However, it is crucial that we have a clear line of distinction between when an elected member is acting in their capacity of an elected member and when they're acting as a member of public. This allows us, for example, the right to protest or have conflicting views on issues that arise that council may or may not have a position on, but where our personal opinions may be different. The decision today highlights this and is the ultimate factor in deciding whether or not the code applies. It is also crucial that we as elected members adhere to proper processes. This ensures fairness and transparency across all our decisions. In this case, I believe the process was mishandled. Instead of allowing the official process to run its course, the issue was prematurely released to the media, unfortunately amplifying the harm caused by the offensive language. Similar cases in the past involving similar inappropriate language have been resolved through informal meetings without a full trial. And given Councillor Bidder's use of a personal email and his nature of the submission to the Waipara Council as a Waipara ratepayer shows he intended his comments to be in a personal capacity and not as an elected member, which should have been more heavily weighted. And I repeat, do not in any way condone his comments. It is clear that the steps taken here have deviated from our established process, resulting in a potentially biased outcome. No one's debating our roles in public, but I note we have not rejected or accepted the report for the fact that this is because it's about its application and the compromised natural justice. So to ensure fairness and avoid setting a harmful precedent, I will support the amendment to hold training and a review of the conduct to ensure that clarity is given and that we are even-handed in dealing out the code of conduct in any future application of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Huata.
Ko tā te puruhi, ngau I te tangata, he ngau kshkohuru e. Ka re hoki ana pa, hei whakatu ki te au, au e taukuri e. That little ditty was written by my grandfather, koro I te tauhuata, and I always use those kinds of things to bring us to a space and to mihi tu te wiki o te reo Māori. He ai o nuku, he ai o rangi, kia tau te ai o kirungi a tātou katoa mauri ora. Let there be peace above, below, and in between, and amongst us all. Doesn't matter we didn't do that at the beginning, we can do that now. And that little ditty speaks about the sting of the bee. And the bee only has one sting and then it dies. So we have to make the most of our time here as councillors to make an impact. When I agreed to put my nomination forward to become a councillor, I did so with intrepidation, knowing that at any time my integrity and that of my whānau and anyone connected with me could be called into question. I subscribe to the notion that I wear one hat, and that hat is the hat I wake up with and the hat I go to bed with, as a mother, as a councillor, and any other role I fulfil. So as a councillor and elected member, I have to be beyond reproach wherever I am, This is an issue about private versus public. It doesn't matter for me whether I do it in private or in public. I have to know that my tika, my pono, my integrity, my honesty is upheld wherever I am and wherever I go. We are a whānau, whether we might think that or not, but we work together. We're supposed to. And I sit next to Andrew, and there is a saying, he o te kotahi, he o te katoa. When one does wrong, it's owned by the collective, and it speaks to Deputy Mayor Angela's apology. And although I do not agree, I accept that you're a part of my council whānau, and I always ensure that you are looked after. And that is our job as a councillor, it's a duty of care to our community, to our city, to everyone in this room, including our ringa mahi, our ringa whiro, our kaimahi, sitting over around there, that are going to be here when we leave. So I will be supporting the first recommendation because I do think it's proportionate and that behaviour is unacceptable. Safety is key for me as well. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Casey Cox.
Ngā mihi ki a koe, that was hard to follow. Just want to thank you, Andrew, for your apology to the public today. We've been waiting some time for that. Freedom of expression from an elected member, as we've heard today, comes with a concurrent responsibility to be respectful. So I think today is about reaffirming that commitment together, and as Councillor Maria says, as a whānau. I would say that in the past it appears to me that the council hasn't done a great job in terms of upholding a code of conduct, and there has been breaches and perhaps not great processes that have dealt with some tricky situations and also disrespectful language. But that's not a reason to carry on. That's a reason to change. If we've failed to uphold our code of conduct previously, we shouldn't fail to uphold that again now. And the line between, as Councillor Maria said, it doesn't actually need to exist, and we don't need to challenge that line if we always uphold to a way of being or a code of conduct that we've signed up to. And so I appreciate the reminder that this process has given me to wear one hat and to be really conscious of the values and the conduct that each of us must adhere to as elected members. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any further speakers? Otherwise, I'll exercise my right of reply. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. First of all, Andrew's language was rude. It was deliberately inflammatory. It was condescending, and it was inappropriate. And it doesn't matter, in my opinion, whether he was acting as a councillor or a member of the public. It was simply wrong. And I think you add fuel to the fire when you chose to double down to the media. That was an error of judgment, and it was a little hubris, in my opinion. I appreciate your apology today, and I think that's made clear. I have to say I reject the assertion that Ms Hill's report was corrupt or biased. I didn't see that. Right? I disagreed with her findings, and I disagreed about the connection, that public-private component. But respectfully, I didn't see corruption. I didn't see bias, in my opinion. I am disappointed that we didn't take the opportunity to have the informal discussion that has always happened in the past. I'm terribly disappointed with that, because I think that would have been a better way to have expressed to Councillor Bidder that this isn't okay. And I think, well, I shouldn't assume what would have happened, but I think it would have been better to have done that. I am really concerned that it became so public so quickly. And I am horrified to think that it was a deliberate ploy to take what was well, I guess to create an unredacted copy into the public arena that, of course, then triggered a whole barrage of complaints. And I won't make a comment as to the motivation behind that, but I think it's unfortunate. As is, where I agree with Councillor Tim, the unfortunate reality is that the ratepayer of Hamilton will be paying tens of thousands of dollars. We know it's already 21,000 plus, and no doubt there will be more bills to finalise before this thing comes to an end. And I just wonder if there wasn't a better way. In fact, I know, because the policy in the past had always been, let's have that informal discussion. And I do accept some of the narrative that says, well, of course, it's really hard to have that informal process because there are so many people who have made a complaint. But the unfortunate element is that came as a direct result of it being leaked and that it becoming part of the public arena. And of course, it wasn't Councillor Bidder who did it, and it certainly wasn't Hamilton City Council. It was an elected member. And so, you know, I have to say that I was concerned about the political agenda behind that. But I'll be supporting the amendment, not because I think that the investigator's report was corrupt or biased. I just disagreed with this assertion that you were not acting in a private capacity.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Hutt.
Thank you. I found Ms Hill's investigation and report to be clear, professional, and following a set out process which we signed up to when we were sworn in. And I appreciated the legal opinions shared by the lawyers in the room. Last week we made a decision on waters, and we were reminded that it was one vote at Waipa District Council many years ago that changed the course of local history. And ensuring we have a working relationship with our neighbours is something that, in my opinion, is more important than ever. But I want to talk about disability, and I want to talk about the reality of being a disabled person. Something I know many disabled people grapple with is the grief of knowing how different your life would be. Easier, less marginalised, less painful if you were able-bodied. And this is something I often think about as a disabled person myself. The social model of disability is a framework that positions disability as a normal part of the variations of being human. Some people have brown hair, some people are tall, and some people's bodies work a little differently to other people's. Having a disability doesn't have to be marginalising or stigmatising. It's the choices we make as a society that determine that. The way we don't accommodate people, you know, stairs instead of a ramp. It's also the special slurs that we make up to particularly disrespect and diminish them. Imagine if a permanent part of you, which you didn't ask for and you didn't cause, was a synonym for being bad and wrong and not deserving of humanity or dignity. You just have to look at the recent Royal Inquiry into Abuse and Care to see how that same attitude caused inhumane neglect for over 50 years in this country to disabled people. I have had over 40 members of the public speak to me about those comments, and ironically it was kind of heartening to hear how thoroughly people have rejected this type of language. It brings me back to the social model of disability. We don't have to live in a world where being disabled means you're treated as less than human. But being held accountable for our actions and our language is part of being in community. It shows that the community believes we're possible of better than what our current behaviour represents. I don't personally think it's fair to call earnest members of the public who have aspirations for a more inclusive, less discriminatory world, and I quote, lunatics or extremists. Those comments shared in the agenda and sit on the public record and make me question the sincerity of the more apologetic comments made today. When our community says, hey, we think elected members are better than this, it's our choice as to whether or not we live up to it. I could have chosen a lot of different language today to express my frustration and disappointment, but I didn't. We're simply requesting that elected members also express our frustrations and disappointments without catching disabled people in the crossfires and contributing to a long history of marginalisation. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Donovan, Councillor Naidu-Rolfe, we haven't heard from you. Councillor Donovan.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Chair Angela. First of all, I don't condone the language that Councillor Bitter used. I would reiterate the sentiments echoed. I would echo the sentiments of those before me. I also accept that Ms. Hill report was not corrupt, and echo Councillor Ewan's sentiments as well. But it's a matter of process, and it's just not quite right, and that's the bit that I'm really struggling with and feeling a little bit conflicted. So when I signed up to be a councillor, and I really, really love Councillor Maria's concept of one hat. You may look at me and say, he's got nice hair, why would he wear so many hats? But I actually have a hat collection, which is quite ironic. But anyway, we're not here to talk about me. But I do wear one hat, and I do run a moral code of turn up on time, know your lines, and don't be a douchebag. And that's simply how I roll, and like to think that how others around me would also roll as well. But if there's a flaw in a process, then I'm obligated to try and work out how to make that process better for next time. So that's all I've got to say. Thank you for the opportunity, Chair. And I'd have to say I've not enjoyed this today.
Thank you, Councillor Donovan. Councillor Naidu-Rolfe.
It has been a tough day, and I think it is tough because we are all colleagues. Like Councillor Maria said, we are one whānau, and we've still got to work with Councillor Andrew, so it's a really uncomfortable position to be in. You know, like everyone else, I agree that, you know, the words that Councillor Bitter used, it was derogatory. It's not acceptable, and it should never be used, whether it be private or public, of any capacity whatsoever. In saying that, I do appreciate the apology that was made today. I came in today with an open mind, like everyone here, and listening to the debate, because I didn't know where I sat with the decision, and it's not because what Councillor Bitter did was wrong. There's no question about that in my mind. And what if there was an unredacted version? What if the unredacted version was not made public? Then where would we be? Would we even be here? So that's where I'm struggling a little bit. But then again, a public submission would be made public, but there'd be a redacted version. I tried to be objective, so not looking at it personally, and I go, I've faced multiple racist comments, for example, and I take that very personally, and this wasn't,
But then I go, what if it was? Would I feel differently? So it's really testing, I guess, my values and where I sit with this. And then we come to the issue of private versus public capacity. And I do agree, you know, it's why I avoid the supermarket on most days, because, you know, you get stopped in the aisles to talk about footpaths and rubbish bins. It's the same as in pharmacy world, you know, when I'm a pharmacist, I'm still a counsellor. When I'm a counsellor, I know everyone here asks me for pharmacist advice. So it's not, you know, interchangeable. And I'm upheld by the code of conduct at council, but also the code of ethics under our health regulation. So, yeah, whether it's public or private, I don't think that's a point that that I can debate, because you are who you choose to be, and you know, you go to bed, you wake up, you're that person. So I have struggled with this, to be totally honest. But I come back to core values, and I do believe that what happened was wrong, and it does need a formal apology. So I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to support the motion.
Thank you. Right, I'll exercise my right of reply. Let's not pretend that this isn't about us as well, for the very simple reason that the code requires us to be accountable to each other. Councillor McIndoe said that we would want to distance ourselves from it, from the process. We can't. I am satisfied with the repeated assurance from highly qualified legal professionals that the process has been followed, is robust, is appropriate, and is lawful, even if some of my colleagues do not. In considering this matter, my mind goes to the members of the public and their expectations, and what message we are sending as a council, and our willingness to accept responsibilities for our collective actions. With elected office comes responsibility, and with those responsibilities, they're binding on us, regardless. We don't get to choose when we behave well or when we behave badly. In light of the fact that we have been assured that the process is correct and that the language used by Councillor Bidder is not in dispute, as is laid out in the investigator's report, the language that was used is a matter of fact. To make this decision about the process is simply a red herring and a deflection from the real matter at hand. And what is at hand is our collective obligation to treat people with integrity and respect at all times, and recognise that we are held and should be held to higher standards of behaviour. So I urge my colleagues to carefully consider as you cast your vote today, as it will show the public and your colleagues what your standard is acceptable of behaviour. Right, I will put that to the vote. We'll do that on the board to help the governance. I don't think there's points of order after debate, actually. Just one moment. No, sorry, Councillor, there is no ability to do a point of order under 26.4 once the chairperson has called for the vote. Thank you. So we'll put the vote to on the board. Let's do that. So, sorry, yes, the amendment first. So we're going to put the Councillor Taylor, Councillor Pike amendment first and vote on that. For the online voters, can you please read out who was for and against the amendment?
The motion is lost, noting councillors McIndoe, Pike, Taylor and Wilson were for the motion. Councillors Casey Cox, Donovan, Huata, Hutt, Naidu Roth, Deputy Mayor O'Leary and Councillor Thompson were against.
Thank you. Now we will vote on the motion, which is the my motion, moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Thompson. We will do that on the electronic board. And we will read out how the votes were cast.
One moment.
Okay, we'll have to vote again. Apologies. We're having some technical issues. That's okay. So we're voting for the motion.
The motion is carried, noting councillors Casey Cox, Donovan, Huata, Hutt, Naidu Roth, Deputy Mayor O'Leary, councillors Pike and Thompson voting for the motion. Against the motion, we have councillor McIndoe, Taylor and Wilson.
Thank you very much. That is the close of the meeting. Thank you to staff and presenters as well.